You are listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. In the previous episode, we did a deep dive into the world of consensual non-monogamy, or CNM for short, and we dispelled a lot of common myths and misconceptions about sexually open relationships. Today, we're going to dig further into this topic by exploring the nuts and bolts of how non-monogamous relationships actually work in real life. To do that, we're drawing from a brand new study led by my guest, which set out to map the most common and effective CNM relationship practices. We're going to discuss the core strategies that help people to maintain multiple relationships with intention, stability, and harmony. We'll be talking about everything from how partners communicate about jealousy, to how they manage time and resources, to what it really means to have or not have relationship hierarchy. We'll also get into sexual health, compersion, shared sexual experiences, and even reputation management. I am joined once again by Dr. Justin Mogilski, an associate professor of psychology at the University of South Carolina, Salkehatchie, where he teaches courses on human sexuality, the psychology of marriage, and evolutionary psychology. Dr. Mogilski recently published a study of nearly 5,000 monogamous and consensually non-monogamous people that aims to better understand how folks maintain multiple intimate relationships. Whether you're consensually non-monogamous, CNM curious, or monogamous, this episode will help you to better understand how people build ethical, sustainable, and deeply meaningful connections. This is going to be another fascinating conversation. Stick around, and we're going to jump in right after the break. If you love the science of sex as much as I do, consider becoming a friend of the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. The Kinsey Institute is the world's premier research organization on sex and relationships, and you can help them continue the legacy of Dr. Alfred Kinsey, whose pioneering research changed everything we think we know about sex. Visit kinseyinstitute.org to make an impact. Your donations can help support ongoing research projects on critical topics. You can also show your support by following Kinsey Institute on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for supporting sex science. Okay, Justin, in the last episode, we talked all about myth versus fact when it comes to consensual non-monogamy. In today's show, we're answering the actual question that a lot of people are secretly thinking, which is, how the hell do you actually do this in real life? Like, how do people keep multiple relationships from turning into chaos, not just emotionally, but also in terms of their calendar, right? So you actually published a paper recently looking at what people in CNM relationships are doing to maintain their relationship quality. And you really mapped out the patterns here. But before we get into that, briefly, how did this project start? What was the impetus for it?
I had the same question. How are you doing this? No, actually, very early on in grad school, I met some people who are consensually non-monogamous. And my background is I came from an evolutionary psychological perspective. And if you're in that world, what you hear is, jealousy is a very strong deterrent. People are mate guarding one another. CNM just isn't going to work. And so you hear people who are having multiple partners. And honestly, I was just curious. I was like, well, how do you deal with all of these things? Mm-hmm. And so I did some early work just trying to replicate some findings from evolutionary psychology within a consensually non-monogamous sample. And there was a difference there. Something was differing. So for example, some of the traditional differences you see between men's and women's reactions to sexual versus emotional infidelity, that didn't replicate. Some things about mate retention, how often, how much effort people are putting into retaining their mates, guarding them. That wasn't the same as monogamous relationships. So there's something weird going on here. And one of the thoughts that I then had was, well, again, maybe people are having the same exact experiences as everyone else, right? That you are in a relationship, you value this relationship, you're experiencing these negative feelings, these kind of negative emotions to protect that relationship. But then maybe where people are diverging, say CNM people are diverging from monogamous people, is, well, what do they do about it, right? So what we wanted to do is really document what are people in these relationships doing to address some of the common and potentially kind of universal challenges that people face when they get into multiple intimate relationships. Mm-hmm. So the idea here was we started with these kind of set of problems that people face. Things like, if you have multiple partners or your partner has other partners, you might face the risk of, again, your partner abandoning you. There might be some question of how resources are going to be spent towards children. Are they going to continue to invest in children? Are you going to experience competition, rivalry with other people? Are you going to contract a sexually transmitted infection? Are there going to be reputational concerns, right? Because if this is a stigmatized kind of relationship, their social status is going to be negatively impacted by it. And so what we did was we started with this assumption that every living person has to deal with this potential risk. This was 2 studies within a larger project. In the first study, we just asked people, we went out to people who had experience with consensual non-monogamy online, social media sites. We had a very large network of collaborators who kind of sent out a survey to a bunch of people. And we asked them, well, what are the best and the worst ways of practicing consensual non-monogamy? And we got this huge list of, best ways to do it. We then had a bunch of independent raters just go through that and say, well, okay, can we organize these responses into different categories? And what we did as a team is we said ahead of time, we actually expect, I want to say it was something like 11 or 12 different practices, things that people are going to be doing in consensually non-monogamous relationships. We then asked these raters to sort the responses that we got into these categories. It was an iterative process. And eventually we got to this point where we had 10 different practices that we then created a measure, a questionnaire that people could answer to tell us, well, how often do you, in your relationship with a particular partner, engage in those practices? And so we could look and so we could measure, and this is a very short questionnaire. It's like 30 items. Anyone could take it. It then gives us kind of the score of, well, how often are you doing these things? Then what we did was we took that measure that we created and we administered it alongside a bunch of relationship quality measures. So we looked at, how satisfied people are overall, how sexually satisfied they are. We also looked at how much competition they get, how much conflict they have with their partners, how much conflict they have with their partners' partners. And then we also looked at sexual health, mental health, physical health. So we ran the whole gamut. And our idea was, well, if everyone's dealing with these same basic problems, maybe people who are doing these best practices of consensual non-monogamy, what those best practices are doing is they are circumventing some of the problems that you would expect anyone to have to face, right? Mm-hmm. So if anyone has to face, a potential abandonment, there are 2 practices that we've identified, things like, disclosing attraction to a partner or becoming really good at communicating about jealousy. What that's going to do is it's going to help to circumvent that problem. Mm-hmm. So that's the approach that we took. And it got published, and there's support for that idea that these practices are doing something to presumably improve people's quality of the relationship.
Yes, and full disclosure, I was involved in this project. You were the leader on it, and you brought together this big team of international folks who have studied consensual non-monogamy over the years, and so really brought in expertise from a whole bunch of different people. And it's a really cool, really ambitious study, and I think it took like 5 years or so in order for the paper to emerge. But now we have it, and is it kind of fair to say that you've kind of created the guidebook here of the real life habits that help people kind of make things work when they have more than one partner?
I think it's kind of a guidebook. I would say that we're at a point with this research, and this is something that I want to be very clear about with any of the listeners, anyone who's reading this paper. At no point did we actually test whether these things that people are doing cause a change in relationship quality. What we know is that if people report doing these things, they also report higher relationship quality. And when we look in the data, I don't think there are a lot of good alternative explanations for why these things are related. So I'm tempted to say, yes, this is a guidebook. If you do these things, you're going to have a better relationship. But we don't quite know that. So I don't want to sell this as a guidebook yet.
Well, I appreciate the responsible, scientifically based answer there, right?
Because another 10-year commitment. Yeah.
Figure this out. People often want to make claims that go way beyond the data, but we do need the intervention study at some point so we can say, here's the guidebook. So what you created here is called the Multiple Relationships Maintenance Scale. And it really is this list of relationship practices that people use to maintain multiple partnerships at the same time. So let's briefly walk through some of the key things that are on here. You already alluded to some of these things, but I'm just going to mention each one by one. And then if you can just tell us briefly, like, what does this mean or what would it look like in practice? That would be great. So first, we have disclosure of attraction. So what are you talking about here, and what does that look like in practice?
This is telling your partner that you have attractions to other people. I think the habit right now is you hide that, right? So if
Mhm.
you're in a monogamous relationship, what you do is if you're feeling attraction to someone else, you tuck that down, you hide that away, you don't tell your partner about it. And I think it's often seen as a virtue, right? What you're doing is you're saving them from this stress of having to imagine that you are attracted to someone else. Or what you're doing is you're just trying to not acknowledge it. You're trying to say, I'm not going to act on this, right? But what you could do instead, if I'm attracted to someone else and then my partner suspects that, what they're probably going to do is they're going to run through every single scenario of what that attraction means, right? Does that mean you're secretly spending time with them? Are you texting them? Are you having plans of like getting together with them? Or you're having sex with them and I don't realize it? And when they have to run through those scenarios, I mean, that's a very anxious process, right? Alternatively, what you could do is you could tell your partner, hey, I am attracted to this person, and this is what it means. Yeah, I'm attracted. What you're perceiving, you're picking up on me maybe like having attraction to this other person. Yes, you're not crazy. I am attracted to this other person. However, now what we can do is we can talk about this and say, do you actually want to act on this? Does this mean anything? And I think for a lot of people, they're probably going to say, well, no, I feel attraction. You're picking up on it. It's making you feel jealous, but you really have no reason to feel jealous because I'm not going to act on it. So I think the disclosure of the attraction, it prompts a conversation about what that attraction means, as opposed to hiding it and then essentially letting your partner just sit there with their anxiety, trying to imagine what that means. And I think that's the therapeutic value.
Yeah. Now, next up, we have jealousy regulation, which we're kind of going to skip over because we covered that pretty extensively in the last episode. But basically, it's very similar to what you described in terms of how people deal with that disclosure of attraction, right? When it comes to jealous feelings that might emerge in a non-monogamous relationship, rather than suppressing that or hiding that, people who are invested in kind of maintaining these multiple partnerships, they're going to be disclosing that they're feeling jealous and they're going to find a way to kind of work through those feelings and figure out, well, where is that jealous feeling originating from? What is prompting that in the first place? And then how can we adjust or modify or change things to reduce or relieve those jealous feelings? So, disclosure of attraction and jealousy regulation, I think, are really just about naming some things that are often really uncomfortable for people to deal with in the relationship, and then actually coming up with some concrete solution for it, as opposed to, again, just pretending it doesn't exist or suppressing these things.
I think one of the things that people imagine is once you start talking about jealousy, that you're just going to have to talk about it all the time, right? I think there's this meme, there's this stereotype that, oh, poly people, CNM people, they're just always talking about the relationship, always talking about jealousy. And I think where that comes from is at the very beginning, you might have to, right? What you're doing is you're sharing this information, you're naming something that wasn't named before, you get to work through it. What your partner is expecting is they don't know what to expect, right? They're jealous, they're sensing this attraction, they're not sure where it's going to go. And so once you start talking about it, and you say, what does this other attraction mean? Like, is this jealousy something that I need to actually listen to? Eventually what you'll learn is, oh, there's actually no real threat here. My relationship keeps going. You didn't leave me. I'm not having this weird, awkward, competitive vibe with somebody else. Like these threats that I perceived, they're not there. And now you don't really have to talk about the jealousy as much. I think there's this kind of investment that you make when you disclose attraction or learn how to communicate about jealousy. You invest in your partner's security in you, feeling calm in those situations. And now I think to the extent that maybe people in CNM relationships don't feel jealousy as much might be that they just don't react to jealousy as strongly because they've taken these precautions to communicate with their partner about the causes of that jealousy. And they've just gotten really good at dealing with it.
Makes sense. Now, next up, we have compersion, right? Now, this is a term that might be new for some people. So what does compersion even mean?
Compersion is, I always introduce it as, oh, it's like the opposite of jealousy, but then I immediately follow that up with, it's not. So it's kind of this experience where, if your partner is spending time with someone else, having sex with someone else, rather than focusing on the negative experience or feeling this kind of distress because of it, you may have gotten to a place where you start to appreciate and you say, oh, my partner is having a good time. And so I enjoy the fact that my partner is having a good time with someone else. It's this kind of appreciation, this joy of kind of your partner's extra-pair relationships. It is kind of the opposite of jealousy in that it's more positive. But I think the reason that it's not quite the opposite of jealousy is because I think it's its own distinct thing so jealousy, you're going to feel very, very quickly, very naturally. Compersion, I think you have to work a little harder to get towards. You might have to learn it a little bit. Whereby, again, you have to see that your partner's having a good time with someone else. You have to believe that their relationship is good for them, that it's healthy for them, that it's not hurting your relationship. And then what you can do is eventually get to this point where you say, this relationship isn't a threat. And in fact, my partner is happier. They're having a better time than they've ever had before because they're getting to act on this kind of attraction that they had. And so I think there is this deep appreciation that you can start to have for your partner feeling that satisfaction, that fulfillment. And I think that's the way to think about compersion.
Yeah, I think that's well described. And, the way I like to think about it is that jealousy and compersion kind of each run on their own separate continuum. And you can feel both jealousy and compersion at the same time, right? It's possible to feel both or neither or be somewhere in between. And so it's not just a one or the other kind of thing. But I do think compersion for a lot of people is kind of this learned emotion because it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people to kind of take pleasure in your partner's pleasure, in the idea that somebody else can make your partner happy. Because, for a lot of people, that does create this feeling of insecurity or this idea that like, I'm not enough. And so it's something that oftentimes you have to work on in order to be able to feel that emotion. Let's be honest, every family has that one person who is impossible to shop for during the holidays. You know exactly who I'm talking about. And every year, you spend way too much time stressing over what to get them. Well, this year, I have a simple solution: Cozy Earth. The best gift you can give is something that cuts through the holiday chaos and invites someone to slow down, de-stress, and actually enjoy being at home. And that's where Cozy Earth shines. Their products feel special the moment you touch them, and the quality actually lasts. When I gave my partner a bamboo sheet set from Cozy Earth, it became the gift he couldn't stop talking about. We use it every single day. Getting into bed now feels luxurious, and the breathable fabric made from viscose from bamboo keeps us the perfect temperature all night long. Our sleep has never been better. And the best part is how stress-free they make everything. You get a 100-night sleep trial to make sure you love it, and a 10-year warranty because they know these products are built to last. Right now, Black Friday has come early at Cozy Earth. Use code Justin for 40% off. These deals won't stick around, so start your holiday shopping early. And if you get a post-purchase survey, be sure to mention that you heard about Cozy Earth right here. Check the show notes for the link and be sure to use code Justin to claim your discount. Wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth. Are you looking to kickstart your intimate life or improve your sexual health and wellness? There are tons of supplements on the market that make bold promises. Unfortunately, however, finding one that actually lives up to the hype is a tall order because so many of the products out there contain questionable ingredients, are underdosed, or just don't work at all. That's why I'm excited to tell you about VB Health. VB Health is in the business of trust and transparency. Their sexual wellness supplements are doctor-formulated and rigorously third-party tested for purity and potency. They're also made right here in the USA. Whether you're looking to boost your sex drive, support semen health, or increase vaginal lubrication, VB Health has something for you. If you're ready to ditch the shady stuff and choose a sexual health supplement that's effective and that you can feel confident about, it's time to check out VB Health's range of supplements, including Drive Boost, Load Boost, and Soaking Wet. Learn more and get yours at vb.health. Visit vb.health and use code Justin for 10% off, or click the link in the show notes. Now, next up, we have caring for unrelated children or childcare willingness. So people in CNM relationships sometimes are bringing kids from other relationships into the picture. So how do they manage that?
Well, so the reason that this is worded in such a way that it is unrelated children is it was formed from this idea that, evolutionarily speaking, if you successfully pass your genes on to the next generation, it's because you've taken care of the individuals who are genetically related to you, your genes get propagated, et cetera. And so we actually tend to have this response where if a child is not genetically related to us, you might treat them a little bit worse. Not that you're going to necessarily abuse them, but you might have a preference for your child over someone else's child for very rational reasons. And so I think you have to get into this headspace where if you are having multiple partners and there are multiple children involved, you might have this bias. You might have this bias where you treat your children or some children better than others. And I think that there can be this conflict that arises when you do that. And so being aware of that and then thinking about the fact that those biases exist, you can then take precaution to not act on those biases and maybe foster a little bit more willingness to care for children that are unrelated to you. Maybe because it pleases your partner, right? Ultimately, that might be part of the relationship. They're looking for someone who's kind of willing to provide care. The other thing that people might do is if, for example, you're something like kitchen table polyamory, where you're all living together, you tend to kind of get together, you're constantly kind of all up in each other's business. You might help take care of each other's children, but other people might do it differently, where what they do is they say, I kind of want to keep the families separate. I don't really want other partners having influence on my children, how I raise children, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that there are multiple ways of kind of coordinating it. Mm-hmm. But if you are more willing to give childcare, and we are more willing to kind of take that effort to make sure that someone else's children are at least having what they need and what they're getting from the relationship, just as much as your children are, or whatever, whoever you're biased to care for, I think that's what's going to lead to better coordination among partners, kind of a better family environment, better raising environment. Mm-hmm. But to be quite honest, I think there's a lot that we don't know about childcare within consensually non-monogamous relationships. Elizabeth Sheff, she's done a lot of great work. Pallotta Chiaroli, they've collected a lot of good interview data. And there are some researchers who've collected kind of larger quantitative data on childcare. But I would say that this is something that, at least to my standards, we have not really fully fleshed out. I believe that childcare is something that our children raised in polyamorous families, they very well can have very high quality outcomes, because by being in, say, a polyamorous family, you might have a larger social network, right? You're connected to more people. You might mm-hmm. run into people who you wouldn't normally run into. And so you have that diversity of perspective. And you also have risk pooling, right? So if you are, a part of a group, and let's say one person loses their job, or one person, suffers an injury, and now they can't provide as well for the children. If you are part of this unit, this collective unit, then you can kind of pool the risk. You can help each other out in those moments where things aren't going well for one person, right? So I think there's that safety there. And those are some of the advantages, but also some of the, again, precautions that people take to make childcare work.
Yeah. So definitely a complicated issue in terms of how you manage that. But, if you're going to be involved with partners who are bringing in kids from other relationships, you do have to figure out some way to manage and navigate that. Now, next up, we have shared extra-pair sexual experiences, which is a very scientific sounding term for basically how do we deal with the fact that our partner is going to be having sex with other people. And there are lots of different ways that people might manage this, right? And it ultimately comes down to the rules or boundaries that people might have in their own relationship. So, for example, sometimes people have rules that they only sexually engage with other people with their partner present, right? For other people, it's kind of a don't ask, don't tell situation where they kind of have this freedom or flexibility to have other sexual partners, but they don't really talk about it with one another. And then other people have, the full open disclosure policy where it's like, if you're going to be sexual with somebody else, I want to know about it. And you tell me shortly afterwards. And so it's all out in the air. So, there's really no one right way to handle this. I think what matters really is just, are you talking about it? And do you have a plan for how you're going to navigate the fact that your partner is having sex with other people?
It comes down to communication. So the shared extra-pair sexuality is, are you engaging in sex with your partner, with other people? Or are you sharing your sexual fantasies about having sex with other people with your partner? Mm-hmm. Are they included in that? Now, whether people want to have sex with their partner's partner, or whether that dynamic that chemistry works, that's going to differ between people, right?
Yeah.
But I think the thing that everyone benefits from is communicating about this subject or communicating these experiences in a way that might help alleviate some of that perceived threat, right? So as much as, your attraction to someone else could be a threat to your relationship, you might think, well, if you're having sex with this other person, are you taking precaution? Or the way that you're having sex, there might be something you need to know about that experience to kind of alleviate some of the stress that you feel about them having sex with someone else. Sharing those experiences might be a way to communicate about that, mm-hmm. to be able to maybe even voice, your own hangups or your concerns. You get to talk about it. You get to communicate about it. And if you're involved, you get to actually see what's happening instead of you fabricating this idea of what's happening when they have sex.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you are clearer about that, again, you can get to a point where maybe you don't need to share that information as much. Maybe you don't need to be having sex together with other people because you've gotten to a point where you know this isn't a threat to me.
And, sometimes too, one of the things about these experiences is that there can be this element of compersion that happens as well, where kind of like you take pleasure in the fact that your partner is being sexually satisfied by other people. I've certainly interviewed many people in studies that I've done on the topic of cuckolding, where they want their partner to go out and sleep with other people and then come home and tell them about it because they take joy or pleasure in knowing that their partner was fulfilled, even though they didn't personally take part in it or weren't there to witness it. It's sort of kind of used as a form of dirty talk afterwards. So, again, this goes back to the fact that consensual non-monogamy is this big umbrella term, means a lot of different things. And so, how people might apply these strategies is going to look different depending on the specific unique structure of their own relationship and how they're practicing non-monogamy. And, that feeds into the next topic on the list, which is partner hierarchy or lack thereof. This is where the whole primary versus secondary conversation comes in. So briefly, tell us a little bit about hierarchical versus non-hierarchical non-monogamy.
Yeah, so partner hierarchy just broadly refers to this habit that you might have with a partner where when you're making life decisions, when you're just trying to make any decision, what you're doing is you might be prioritizing one or a few partners relative to others. Their concerns might matter more, or them having a good experience, that's more important than, say, other people having a good experience. So hierarchy is just this idea that partners are not equally experiencing certain privileges within the relationship. And so non-hierarchy is you're trying to make this effort. This is one of the myths about non-hierarchy, I think, is that people think that, people who are non-hierarchical, they don't distinguish between partners. They absolutely do. Yep. But what they might try to do is, again, not let those hierarchical biases affect how they treat each other partner, right? Make more of an effort to be fair to everyone.
Yeah.
But of course, that's very difficult because very often what you do is you find you might have a better connection. You might want more. You share more life goals with one partner compared to another. So if hierarchy looks like, well, you're living with this partner, but you're not living with this partner, it might be because you want to live with that partner and you really don't want to live with this partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's important with hierarchy, my guess, and we don't look at this in the data set, but my guess is that it's more about making sure that each partner is getting what they need from whatever arrangement you have. Now, if you have a partner, you're married to them, you have children together, you have a house together, you have all kinds of investments together, interdependencies together, it might make sense to give them a little bit more hierarchy just because you've got to manage more with them, right? And there is kind of more of an interdependence between you. Alternatively, someone who's maybe you're not living with, you're not as invested in, maybe there's something, maybe they don't expect that, right? They don't want to live together. They don't want to have children together. They're just expecting this to be something more casual. I think as long as they are getting that from whatever hierarchical system you've put in place for your relationship, I think as long as they're getting what they want, that's what's important. Whether hierarchy or non-hierarchy is better, I don't know. But in our data set, what we did find is that people who reported more partner hierarchy did tend to report higher relationship quality overall, especially in terms of investment and commitment and trust and things like that.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think hierarchical polyamory kind of gets this bum rap because there's this idea that, well, the partners aren't on equal footing. And so somebody's kind of getting the short end of the stick. At least that's my sense of why some people kind of really don't like this idea of hierarchical poly. And, we actually published a paper a few years ago where we were looking at hierarchical versus non-hierarchical relationships. And what we found was that in the ones where people considered themselves to be non-hierarchical, they still had what appeared to be a primary partner, right? One partner that they had been with the longest, that they lived with, that they shared the most resources with. And so we kind of were calling them pseudo-primary partners because they looked a heck of a lot like a typical primary partner. But, I think what's happening here in a lot of these cases is that a lot of people are just kind of shucking the label of hierarchical polyamory and saying that they're putting everybody on equal footing, But in reality, it is actually very hard to make every single relationship equal in all ways because you can't always do that. And there are some logistical and legal things that can actually make it challenging to provide the same investment in multiple partners at the same time. So it's a complex issue.
I do think that some people do get the shorter end of the stick. And I
Sure.
think very often when people are considered secondary partners, they may not be getting some of the really basic things that someone might need from that relationship. And so I agree with you. I think kind of shucking the hierarchy label might just really be this way to signal and say, oh, I'm not hierarchical, even though I really am. Like they're trying to signal certain virtue. But I also do think that there is wisdom to recognizing what hierarchy exists and trying to figure out if that conflicts with the relationship quality of your other partners. Because if it does, there's probably something that you can do to balance those scales a little bit more or treat them a little bit more fairly.
Yeah. And to be clear, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with hierarchical or non-hierarchical polyamory. Right? You do what it is that works for you. But, just recognize that like different things, again, work for different people here. Now, in terms of some of the other things that were on this scale, we also have sexual health maintenance, which we talked about pretty extensively in the last episode, which is, basically just about how are you going to manage potential threats to you and your partner's sexual health. And so that could include discussions about safer sex practices and STI testing frequency and disclosure when you have a new partner and all these sorts of things. Then we have resource distribution, which gets back to that whole time management issue we also talked about in the last episode, which is how do you divvy up your time, attention, your emotional labor, even your money? It's like really, how do you divide everything up across multiple partners? And again, there's not necessarily one right or wrong way here. And, resource distribution is going to vary based on whether you're in a hierarchical or non-hierarchical context. But it necessitates having a discussion about how you're going to do all of these different things. And then finally, there's the issue of reputation management, which is really, I think, kind of how people manage the stigma of being in a consensually non-monogamous relationship. And how do you decide who you're going to be open with about the fact that you have multiple partners? And, many people who are non-monogamous do decide to keep their relationship status on the down low and try to appear to the outside world as if they're in a monogamous relationship because they want to avoid dealing with the stigma around it. So yeah, we got all these different things going on, lots of different stuff to talk about here that's important if you're trying to manage multiple relationships.
The other thing about the reputation management bit is, even though people, I think, reasonably manage their reputation, within our data set, what we find is that people who do that tend to have worse relationship quality. It's useful to liken it to being secretive about a relationship, right? If you are secretive about a relationship that you're in with somebody, they're not going to come to family events. You're not going to shout them out on social media as your partner. You're not going to do these kind of like public displays of affection that solidify a lot of people's relationships. And so the other thing is you might kind of not seek help. So let's imagine that you're having, say, relationship issues and you want to go to therapy and you want to go to, something like couples therapy. I know that there's throuples therapy as well, but you might be less likely to go out and seek those services because you feel like you're going to be judged for it. And where I've seen researchers, Amy Moores, Heath Seckinger, I think they've been very good about pushing this idea of, no, we need to destigmatize this just for the purposes of people seeking help when they need it. And I think that's one of the strongest arguments for really destigmatizing consensual non-monogamy is I think people do need access to these practices, these behaviors. And the only way they're going to get it is if it's safe to kind of reach out and ask for these tools.
Yeah. So I got to say, throuple therapy, that's kind of a tongue twister. Try saying that 3 times.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever said that one before. Yeah.
So, it's really cool that this project, really helps us to identify the factors that really seem to be at the core of what makes having multiple relationships work at the same time. And, although we still need that intervention study that says, all right, if you do all of these things, it's going to guarantee or increase the odds that you're going to have better experiences or more satisfying relationships. I think the data are pretty promising in pointing to these factors as like, these do seem to be the core things that you need to talk about and discuss if you want to maintain multiple satisfying relationships at the same time. But I think what this points to is that there isn't just like one simple, easy formula for all of this, because navigating multiple relationships is complex.
Yeah. There are multiple problems, multiple risks that you have to prepare for, right? I think as long as you don't get it in your mind that there's just like this one magic bullet for making things work, it's going to be several bullets, and it's probably going to take time, and it's probably going to take a little bit of thought and creativity. But I think there is an underlying principle here that, again, there are things that if you have multiple partners, you're going to have to worry about that you didn't have to worry about if you only have one partner. And how well you think about and prepare for those risks is going to be the difference between those who are successful versus not.
Yeah. And, I think even if you're somebody who only has one partner and you're monogamous, there are probably still things that you can learn from this in terms of how you can have more happy, healthy, satisfying relationships. Like, for example, how are you going to deal with the fact that your partner is going to be attracted to other people and likely be attracted to multiple other people over the course of your relationship? Or how are you going to deal with uncomfortable emotions like jealousy? And, I would imagine that these same factors are probably also going to predict health and happiness in monogamous relationships if people are talking about them.
I agree.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Justin. It was a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and read your new paper all about multiple relationships?
I have several different social media accounts. Just Google me, you'll find something. But what I'm doing is I am trying to take this paper, which is published in Archives of Sexual Behavior. Well, it's in press. It's coming out soon. But if you go to my Substack, what I'm doing there is I'm trying to take what we've written in this paper and translate it for a more popular audience. Mm-hmm. And so I am in the process of kind of writing that. So if you want to get in that slipstream, that's great. Otherwise, you'll find me on Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Find Your Flavor. I'll be there. But if you're really nerdy and you want to read all my papers, ResearchGate is where I upload everything. It's freely available.
Well, great. And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. So thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.